And today we're going to talk about meaningful interactions. This is something that I've talked about twice, I think, this year. Once for Brandon Hall group somewhere in summer, and then recently in DevLearn. Both times, I think it was met with a lot of enthusiasm. But for INTEA Breakfast, of course, we have reworked this presentation entirely. I think there's just one slide left untouched. And hope you'll enjoy it. As always, my partner in crime here, Iris, made me redo this whole thing with all new ideas and examples and so on. So let's jump in. So the first question is, before we begin, again, everyone is on mute, and please don't forget to use chat if you need it. And if you want this recording, you will find it on INTEA Learning YouTube channel. If you want to share, please do. Every breakfast is in there. So if you have missed anything, feel free to jump in and recap. Now, this company, if you know the answer exactly, then don't write immediately in the chat. But does anyone know what INTEA stands for? Well, first of all, INTEA is an acronym.
Yeah.
I'll give you another clue. It's 3 words. Does anyone want to venture a guess in the chat what the words are?
Yeah, but you have to know Latvian to be able to do that, right?
Yes. Or at least
you can at least guess some parts of it, because it's
or you can just be a person who knows us for 10 years plus, because I think we've changed our company name about 5 years ago.
Yeah, so if you have one very old invoice
yes.
from INTEA.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you know. So INTEA in Latvian stands for Interaktīvas tehnoloģijas apmācībai, which translates to interactive technologies for learning. And I'm talking about this just to illustrate the fact that we kind of knew that interactions were a huge part of learning even back then, 13 years ago, when we were kids, basically. And they really are. Interactions are what sets e-learning apart from any other type of lecturing, online reading, reading electronic books, watching YouTube tutorials, and so on. It's the fact that you can actually interact with the computer on several levels, right? You can interact with it technically, kind of click stuff and move stuff around, or you can interact with it mentally and kind of venture a guess, type something in, see if it's right or not, and so on. That's the idea, right? You work with the computer as much as it works with you if you are going through a proper e-learning program. Now, the problem is somehow, the problem is somehow that rather simple idea did not translate well into the industry, and from the very beginning we were kind of shocked. And again, years later, we still see this ubiquitous idea of interaction as just something where you can get to click on something, right? So if you just flip through slides, that's not true learning. It's the cheap version. But you have to actually stop at a slide and click something to reveal more information. This is a timeline example that I snatched off some company's website. A timeline example where you explore a timeline and learn more within a single slide, but that is really not that much different from just flipping through 6 different pages.
6 clicks. Anyways.
Yeah, it's the same 6 clicks, and it's the same zero mental effort to do that. Yeah, of course, this is an illustration in kind that kind of forces you to go through a certain thing, and then it's definitely not something that makes your e-learning worse, but that is something that I would deem a not very meaningful interaction. It's interaction, but not very meaningful. We'll get to that term in a second. Here is another example, right? It's a Tic Tac Toe game, essentially, which disguises a bunch of quizzes. So the rules on this slide are that you get a question, you have to get it right, and then you get a chance to put a tick or a cross into one of those routes so that you can win against the computer in a game of Tic Tac Toe, something like that. So essentially, people who are using this, they feel, hey, we are boring our learners to death with stupid questions that have nothing to do with what they wanted from this learning. So hey, why don't we throw in this game on top of this to kind of disguise this? And if a manager comes to me and asks, hey, I heard that our learners kind of complain about learning and they all say that it's terrible, and the ratings are going down, or consumption is going down, or anything, like, what's up with that? You're like, I don't know, I'm using games, it's a gamified training or something like that. Yeah. Here's another example. And these things, they are not just something that I snatched, this particular one, something that I snatched from some course. That thing is actually for sale. You can buy it from a company that makes these things professional and add it to your learning. So people actually pay money for that, not just waste time on building this. In this case, you have to aim a bow and arrow and shoot one of the balloons. If you shoot it, then you get to answer a question, and I'm not sure what's the meaning.
You earn points or something.
Yeah, well, obviously you earn points. It's a game,
right?
It's a game. So you have to earn points to make everything interesting. And this is not for third graders. This is for like proper corporate learning.
And there are thousands of templates like that.
Yes.
It's not something we just found accidentally online.
Once in a lifetime.
Once in a lifetime, you find libraries of games like that.
Yes, and then just beyond, well, the libraries are there because people are willing to pay money for this, and that means that there is a demand for that, and that demand also translates into people saying, "Hey, we want something like that in our course, even if it's not bought off the shelf. It's custom built for us. Hey, can we make sure that we have a little man running around on screen playing something while you read about the anti-money laundering legislation in European Union as it applies to our bank, or maybe as it does not apply to anything, you just have to know it or something." And here's another example of an interaction which also looks like cartoonish and kind of fun, but in this example, from a great Swedish company called One Day Interact that we had a privilege of working with. So in this case, it's a course on sustainability, on how we should care for the environment for a hotel chain. And in this case, you play a game where you have to select how many fishes you want to catch in a day, and then you click fish, and then you fish them out. The sun sets, the sun rises, it's a new day, there's a little bit less or a little bit more fishes in the pond, and you again have to select how many fishes you want to maximize the amount of fish that you catch, but also not to run out of fish entirely. If you decide to catch 10 fishes, I think by day 3 there are no more fishes left. If you decide to catch just 1 or 2, you will never maximize it. So you have to find a balance. And that's the whole idea. In 5 clicks, you actually experience the idea that sustainability is about not being too greedy. It's about finding the balance between the ability of nature to kind of recreate and replenish itself and the amount that you consume. And maybe you need to consume a little bit less. But that does not mean that you don't consume anything at all. So that's a very deep idea which can be very new to some people. And instead of explaining this at length, they created this game, rather we created this game for them, where you can actually live through that experience in a very funny, cartoonish manner, and trust me, that works. Here's another example, one of my favorites on the internet. You can find this. I think it's called Toxic Coworker. I'll have to find out, but it's a scenario about you being harassed, you being this guy in a blue shirt, and you have a colleague who touches you inappropriately most of the time, and you have to find your way out of this situation, kind of without offending anyone, or within the confines of the law and not getting in trouble with the HR, and there's your colleague who helps you with advice and whatnot. And depending on what you do, you actually develop this scenario into very different situations, right? You can go down a really dark path, or you can just stop it immediately and offend everyone, but kind of still solve the problem, and then you'll get feedback based on that and so on. So that's another way where you can actually live through a situation. And those, as you might have guessed, the previous one, this one, what I would call a meaningful interaction. Here's another example again from one day. It's a pretty cool thing. So it works like a casino slot machine, where you click browse and it randomly generates you 3 different terms which combine into an idea, which might be totally ridiculous, like deactivate self-explanatory cooperation. What's in that? Or it can be something like reduce wasteful paper trail, something like that. And by generating those random kind of like throwing dice, generating those random word combinations will, through a certain methodology that's behind that, of course, will actually help you brainstorm ideas for change at your workplace. Again, this is from the same course on sustainability and on better living through that. So again, it's a tool for thinking. It's fun because sometimes it generates ridiculous results. I specifically chose this one to illustrate, but sometimes it generates something meaningful, and it actually makes you think. Again, there is not much reading, not much games, there are no points, nothing like that, but it's meaningful because we'll get to why exactly in a second. And finally, I decided, why don't we show something of ours? Early. Does anyone in the company? That's the question for INTEA guys online. So does anyone remember this project? Let us know. So the company is Narvesen. It's a kiosk chain that sells coffee and magazines. And we were doing an onboarding training for them. And one big part of what their employees do, they actually put magazines on shelves. And believe it or not, there is a rule which applies to that. There's actually a whole set of rules. There's you'll always find certain type of magazines on the left, like the gardening, and some type of magazines on the right, like women's magazines. And you'll find children magazines below, like on the bottom shelf, of course, so that kids can see that. And actually, by law, you have to put the naughty magazines on the top shelf, kind of beyond 1.80 meters or something, so that kids cannot reach it or even properly see it. Yes, but you can still display them. That was a very fun project. Most of these magazines were downloaded as cover art, but some of them had to be scanned. Especially the naughty ones, we couldn't find them online, but we needed actual, like, proper magazines that can be sold in Latvia, not just random magazine. And we actually had to go out and buy them and then scan them and put them into this course. And I think a copy of Giraffe has been hanging about this office for years now. If you're new and you find the naughty magazine and say no, please know that this is for a project. Hopefully. So again, an interaction where you actually have to put stuff on shelf, and then you check, and the magazines that are in the wrong place actually fall off, and you have to try and put them back. And there is a guy trying to help you and explaining what you need to do. And there is a hint which shows you the I think the word was planogram, kind of the scheme for where everything should go. So it's kind of a simulation of what you actually have to do every morning.
And you don't earn points on it.
Yeah, and there is no points. You just have to put them all in place to proceed. So obviously, some of those were less meaningful and some of them were more meaningful. And then there's a question of what's a meaningful interaction? Kind of, it's well, does anyone feel that on a scale from 1 to 10, do you feel that you would be able to tell a meaningful interaction from a non-meaningful interaction? You would look at something and say, yeah, that's
Makes sense.
That makes sense. I want this in my learning, and not this stupid balloon shooting game. On a scale from 1 to 10, please write in chat how confident you are what's a meaningful interaction, and you will be able to.
Renat is skeptical of her skills. Cautious.
Yeah, we know you're better.
Absolutely.
But we'll improve your confidence.
5, another 5, another 7.
7, okay.
6.
Right. So,
okay.
All right. Okay.
So it's not always obvious, right?
Yes,
it's not very obvious.
It's not very obvious, or maybe people are generously giving us a segue into explaining this.
Okay.
Right. So, what's a meaningful interaction? Well, there are a couple of ways to go about this, and typically, if you open, if you Google this or you open a book on instructional design, you'll immediately stumble upon this person. Does anyone know who this person is? This happy guy from 1950s. I'll give you 10 seconds. His name and surname start with the same letter. And also nobody knows his name typically. as with all model authors. Yeah. So this guy's name is Benjamin Bloom. And he used to be a teacher in the United States, and he was active in the 1950s and 60s, also later, where he created a model which we still know as Bloom's taxonomy, and it has been revised a number of times. This one is the original order of that taxonomy. Well, taxonomy is basically just an order of things. So, or hierarchy, if you like. So that's been reworked. There's been a ton of discussion in the past 70 years about that, and take this with a grain of salt, right? If you've been at our breakfast last week, there was a grain of salt. Bring it here as well. But the idea is that we start at the bottom level where learning is just about knowledge, right? It's about fact, transferring knowledge, transferring facts, making sure that you know that E equals MC squared. And then the next level is comprehension. It's actually understanding what that is, like what's E and what's MC squared and why it's squared as well. Yeah. Next level is application, obviously being able to use that knowledge that you comprehend and understand in problem solving, right? Then the next level is analysis, where you can actually define a problem that you need to solve, right? Or you can actually understand what kind of solutions out of all that sea of knowledge that you have and can apply applies in this particular situation and how you can solve this problem, right? So you can imagine how this, if you think back to your high school, that's typically how you learn something. You learn a formula, then you try to understand what the formula means, and then you learn to apply the formula to solve something. But then you know exactly that the problem you're giving requires this formula, right? Yeah. But then you're given a wider problem or a host of problems, and you have to actually understand what formula to use, or maybe combine those formulas. And this is where we go into actually a synthesis, or maybe synthesis is actually where you can create knowledge. It's actually where you can invent your own formula or invent your own solution. It does not happen that often to most of us, at least in maths, but definitely does happen in everyday life and business life, where you don't only know something, understand that, can apply that to solve a problem, and find that problem to solve, but you can actually create new solutions. You can generate knowledge. You can, and then evaluation, right? It's the ability to say whether what you've created is good, right? Or if it's better than something that's been there before, because this is how progress is made, essentially. So when we teach people, we hopefully try to elevate them from the bottom level to the top level, keeping in mind the goals of why we actually teach them. Not everyone needs to be able to analyze things. Sometimes they just need to apply their knowledge, and also the resources, right? It'd be great if we could, turn everybody into an expert, but we don't do that. We don't do that. We can't do that. It's too expensive, too long, and we don't really need that. So, but that is a very good kind of framework that allows people to think about. It's actually one of 3 frameworks that Bloom has designed. And, we can do a whole hour on Bloom's taxonomy and the way it's involved and so on. But if this is new for you, welcome. If you've heard about that, we're moving on. Bloom's taxonomy. We can talk about this, but explaining something in terms of Bloom's taxonomy to an outsider is typically difficult, right? So even if you understand that this approach is more meaningful in terms of building interaction, and this one is less meaningful, sometimes it's difficult to explain it to somebody who is from outside of this instructional circle, to a manager, for example. Managers are like, especially up high, they will be very excited about those games. They're like, yeah, we need games. Like, learning is boring. We need more of that. It doesn't do anything. It's not meaningful. And then, this is a conversation that's very difficult to have if you, or sometimes vendors will actually try to push this on you because it brings a lot of money to people who build this. But this is a kind of conversation that's very difficult to have if you talk about Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah, because Bloom's taxonomy, most of these words will sound like synonyms to somebody who's not into learning.
Yeah.
And typically the experts, the SMEs, they are not, and they don't need to be, right?
No.
So what they will talk about, you're exactly right, Sergey. They would say, how about we build a mini game?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've had requests like, let's put a fireworks in the end of the course to celebrate the end of it.
That's our favorite.
That's our favorite. And I do understand where does that come psychologically from. Because
people want something to be excited about.
To be excited, to be surprising, to be pleasant, and so on.
To be interactive.
To be interactive again, yeah. And I mean, so many people don't see the difference between animation and interaction, for example. Again, whole other story. But so the Bloom's taxonomy helps you as a person involved in learning and development, but it doesn't help the experts. So but there is something that you can use when you talk kind of in the organization.
Yeah, this is something that will probably help you understand everything better and kind of give you a very quick test, easy, very straightforward way of understanding whether an interaction that you are including in the course that you're building or into any learning program that you are creating, whether it's meaningful or not. And we claim full copyright for that. You will not find a book on that. We invented it ourselves. We've been using this quite successfully, and we think it works. So the idea is that you have the 3 E's rule: the experience, the error, and emotion. So in short, before I jump into examples, the idea is that a good, meaningful interaction will simulate the work-life experience of the person that we are training, right? So if we're training people to talk to customers, a good interaction will involve a conversation with the customer, not a tic-tac-toe game, right? If we're training people to tell bad money from good money when it comes into our bank, a good interaction is centered around that experience, not shooting balloons. That's actually interesting. If we're teaching people about sustainability, then instead of asking questions or offering them to play some sort of a Tetris of sustainability or something, giving them an experience that maybe they don't need to be fishermen, but the experience of actually drawing on resources and giving back resources and finding that balance is meaningful in that sense, although we're training hotel workers, employees, rather than people who fish.
Yeah, I would chip in that the experience bit is not only about simulating the real world, because simulating the real world sometimes is very difficult. It's just the cost is huge,
or it's just overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
You want to take one element of that.
Exactly, and what I would like to note here is that the experience you build might simulate that real world. Sometimes that's fine, but sometimes you need this experience to have some kind of a some kind of a mindset shift, for example. So like the experience with fishing for a hotel worker does not simulate anything in their life, right? Unless they live on the bank of a lake in Sweden. But it does simulate, create this mindset shift. So it's both.
Yeah, so it has to be experiential. Now, the next one is error, and error is about making mistakes and allowing people to make mistakes. It's designing games where you can actually lose, and I will explain that. And finally, the emotion, right? The third D, meaningful interaction, will work around a certain emotion. It will either transform a certain emotion or kind of be built upon a certain emotion. That emotion can be anything like fear, scaring people into complying with information security policies, or easing people's minds around certain subjects, or instigating compassion and understanding and kindness and so on. There should be an emotional part of a meaningful interaction, right?
Especially if we are training, people skills, management skills. That is very much, an emotional experience.
Yes, and we increasingly do that. So here's a couple of examples, if you will. Well, first of all, when we talk about experience, we tend to think about, like you said, simulations, which might be just out of reach for a lot of things, right? And some things are very difficult to simulate, or very expensive, or can't be simulated at all unless it's an equipment and so on. There could be hardware sims, there could be software simulations, and so on, process simulations. But they can be easy as well, right? Because it's all about experience. It's about something very basic where you can make decisions on what you do with a certain client. When they present you with certain information, what do you do with that? Do you probe for more information? Do you refer them? Do you decline them, the service, or so on? Again, if you're in a bank, and so on. It can be simplistic, but it has to kind of rotate around the relevant experience, and relevant is not shooting bullets. Error. So again, you can, if you look at the slides in the bottom right, there are names. If you Google those, you'll actually find those examples. So there's a great example of will you fit into Deloitte, an onboarding, rather not even onboarding. It's a pre-boarding training for people who consider joining Deloitte, a huge consulting company. And it's a branching scenario, very fun, very high quality production, and you actually make further fun choices when you I think this bottom one is you spill a coffee on the back of your future boss, and then you have to decide what to do, whether you tell him or you just keep quiet or you try to do something with it.
Rub it in.
Yeah, you can rub it in. And yeah, and then it comes back to bite you in the back. But the problem with that one, if you play it, is that you cannot go wrong in there. You can a little bit, so that if you choose the wrong option, then it immediately results in a situation where you're told that this is not how we do it at Deloitte, and you have to go back and choose a different option. And we see a lot of interactions which are scenario-based or case-based, where you can't go wrong. And that's not how we learn. A question to the chat, if you're still with us. Have you assembled an IKEA piece of furniture ever?
Now we'll know.
The type of plus or multiple pluses?
Yes, yes.
I know that this year I've assembled maybe 7 pieces or something like that. Like for all for my friends. Typically, when I go to my friends, they're like, "Hey, Sergey, we have this new IKEA shelf. Do you mind helping me or something?" So if you notice, and that might just be me, but people tend to agree. You don't look at the manual until you do something wrong. Right, so it's all self-explanatory. You start putting things together, kind of you glance over the manual and you start doing that, and then something goes wrong, and you're like, wait, where did that thing go? And this is how we learn, actually. We learn by making mistakes, right? As kids, we try to touch something that's hot. This,
don't touch it, it's hot, boom.
Yes, exactly. Like if you have little kids, that, it only makes them more curious. And this is how they learn. And this is how humans learn, by making mistakes, finding out things that don't work and eliminating them, and finding things that do work, but then repeating this over and over and over. A lot of simulations, interactions, scenarios in e-learning don't do that, don't give you that opportunity. Even with quizzes, right? If you choose the wrong answer, it tells you that it's wrong, rather than showing you why it's wrong, right? It tells you, no, this option is wrong because this is the correct way of doing things, or this is correct because it's the correct way. And this third option, yes, it's also wrong because this is the correct way of doing things. And instead, you should actually at least explain what is the consequence of the wrong action, or ideally show that, right? You have to give people an opportunity to fish out all the fish and die of starvation, right? Or you have to give people a chance to be a total jerk to their colleagues and see how their life comes apart because of that. Because it's a scenario, you can do that, but we often don't do that for either lack of resources, because creating all those other wrong options is demands certain effort, or simply because we're afraid. I think we're afraid of showing the incorrect stuff. It's like, hey, if we show them the incorrect thing and they remember it, and
that's the argument usually. What if they remember the wrong way of doing? And
what if they never find out and then try to do that in real life? That's the question. So that's the other the error. You have, like, a good, meaningful interaction allows you to make mistakes and learn from them, rather than shoehorns you down the correct path. And finally, emotional component is often lacking in learning. We've touched upon the subject a couple of times, but that's really important when you talk about interaction. You don't only think in terms of, does it have emotion or not? Balloons, fun, fireworks, something explodes.
Kind of emotional.
Yeah, it's emotional, right? Or you lose a game of Tic Tac Toe, or another example that I did not include in here was a game of bowling, where you actually bowl something to answer questions, a ball actually. So it's not just about having an emotion, it's being deliberate as to what emotion this produces, whether we want this emotion, what emotion do people have before they start this interaction, what emotion we want, what emotional journey we want them to take at the end, and so on. This is an example of putting people into virtual reality to experience a life of a homeless person, and that's that does not necessarily have to be VR, but this is just an example that we use, and I think we've touched upon it in one of our
another
previous
example. We don't have a slide here, but just came to my mind that once we did a project in Sweden where we tried to, it was about smoking prevention, actually.
Right.
So what we did, we made teachers who were supposed to kind of fight smoking in schools, we allowed them to go through a scenario where they would be a teenager. So what happens with them as a teenager, and to show them that teenagers, they see cigarettes and people smoking much more than you would imagine. So we would show different angles, different situations. Right. And again, the goal was to have this emotion and this experience together, because teachers, they are not teenagers. Right. They don't see, they don't have the same motivations, they don't have the same kind of experience. And it was not VR. It was just a comic book in a sense. So what I'm trying to say, that creating an emotional experience does not involve, huge costs, VR and so on. No. It's more about the content and the approach than the technology.
Well, if you ever read a book, you'll know that plain text, no images,
makes you cry sometimes.
Makes you cry sometimes, exactly, or laugh.
Or laugh.
So again, technology has very little to do with that. Speaking of which, I just wanted to point out that there is a research where people were actually trying to scare people by showing them disturbing imagery, or calm them down by showing them very calming images of kittens, I suppose. And that they were using certain technology, rather methodology called PANA sex. PANA is positive attitude, negative attitude, something, to measure the response. So the baseline is around 1. This is your level of anger or fear in your normal state before before scientists start experimenting on you. And then they were subjected to this experience, one group in VR, another group on just desktop computers, and they found out that generally VR provides more impact when it comes to stirring people's emotions of agitation, nervousness, fear, and anxiety. So it kind of, the technology does provide certain impact in certain situations. On the other hand, I don't have a slide here, but that's one of my favorite examples. Another group of scientists actually did an experiment where they put something like that, where they put the learners into shoes of a homeless person, and they tested it once in VR, and the other group did it as a text simulation, like no images, just text explaining what's happening to you and giving you a chance of spending your last dollar on finding shelter, or having food, or buying a medicine, or spending it on drugs, and or helping others. And there's only just a certain amount of money that you can spend. You're limited for resources, and there is no good way out, right? It always devolves into a terrible situation. So one was VR, another one was text. And do you want to venture a guess which one had more emotional impact when they surveyed people afterwards? They asked them about whether they feel more compassion to homeless people and so on. So VR versus text, which one do you think made more impact in terms of people saying that they have more compassion? Andrews has assembled a lot of IKEA furniture. Right, so type in chat. So text versus VR, emotional impact. People become more compassionate towards homeless people. Let us know. VR. Okay, good guess. Anyone wants to?
Anyone thinks otherwise?
Yeah.
Text. There is at least one person who believes in text.
Right. So the answer is VR, and it shows significant improvement in how people felt and how their feelings have changed. But then they asked them a second question, rather than another question. They asked them to donate, and they measured the amount of money which was donated by people who went through a VR experience and actually. And actually agreed that, and indicated that they are more compassionate towards homeless people now, versus people who went through a text simulation. They asked them to actually donate money. So which group do you think donated more money, the text guys or the VR guys, when it was about cashing the checks?
Yeah, let the money speak.
Let the money
what works better?
Yeah. So yeah, as always in learning, we talk about behavior changes, right? Not just awareness. So what do you think? Who paid more money, the VR guys or the text guys? Come on, it's a binary choice.
Liana is still VR. Says still VR. Is Liana correct? Does this depend on audience?
Text VR. So the correct, well, not the correct answer, but rather what happened in that situation, they donated the exact same amount of money, right? So there's probably a certain ceiling where you can just bring in people when it comes to action. So overpaying to bring them to a certain action does not make sense, right? And another moral of the story is that you should look at the actions, not opinions. in everything, right? So there's probably that's a good story for learning as such, right? So you don't have to build something complex, even if it tests well, and everyone's happy to do that and see it when the result is the same, right? So yeah, the question is, does it depend on audience? So of course it does. Definitely it does. Like terrible example, but if you're training blind people, VR would not work for them as well, right? So obviously it depends on people's or people who get sick and scared in VR immediately and not used to that. Could be little kids, could be adults.
But again, the moral is, I think that we sometimes believe in technology or new approaches being per se more superior to the old ones. So now we have VR, so let's use VR because it's new. It will definitely work better than anything else, which is of course not true.
Yeah. Right? And also to this point, most of these experiments are run in universities with students, right?
Yeah, let's be honest.
With American students. And therefore, again, grain of salt, bring it in and kind of test with your specific audiences and people that you actually work with. But in general, kind of food for thought. Right. Now, one of the final notes, emotional intelligence has been ranked on top of critical soft skills in Brandon Hall Group survey from
this year.
I think it was published this year, so probably ran through 2020. And the question is, well, how do you train for emotional intelligence? How do you train for critical thinking? How do you teach innovation? And if we speak in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, right, these are things that sit high up there.
Yeah.
If we talk in terms of interactions, well, that's definitely
not shooting balloons.
Not shooting balloons, but this is something that requires meaningful interactions. And when we build something, when we devote resources to building something, we have to run this through our 3Es of experience, error, and emotion, to just make sure that it checks all the boxes, that it actually works, and we're not wasting this money on something that's not going to give us the result. So yeah, there you go. Now on the final note, right? We spoke. We often talk with writers about this. So why does it keep happening? Like, why meaningless interactions are made? Why? Because obviously, like even you indicated that you can't tell one from another. So why do we keep getting pushed into doing this? And we have identified a couple of reasons that we wanted to really run you through real quick. So first of all, it requires effort.
Right.
You actually have, like, it's easier to do a quiz instead of writing a case,
right?
Or building a scenario or simulating, like it's easier to write how the magazine should be put on shelves and creating a quiz of what is the minimal height of a porn mag to be put on a shelf, rather than actually building this. So it requires certain effort, and we don't always have that. Two is lack of motivation, especially on the subject matter part, because subject matter experts will have to be involved into this, and it's easier for them to give us a text and ask you, hey, can you build quizzes out of that, and then I'll just check that the quizzes are correct and be done with it, rather than sit down with you and design something that's
yeah, because also very often the work of an expert is not the work of a person whom they are teaching. So for that expert, it takes quite a lot of motivation and effort to translate legal requirements into actions, into cases. It's not easy. When I ask my SMEs, do you have a case? Mm-hmm. Can we insert a case into the course to show how it works? I would say 70% of experts fail at that point, or they don't have a case, or they don't know how to do that, how to present, how to create the case, or they don't have access to those cases. They cannot describe them. So it becomes a major problem. And in so many projects, we start with an idea that we'll have a case and we finish with a quiz because of that. Yeah. So it's a big problem.
Yeah.
There, yeah. And skills. Yeah.
It's like, can you write a case? Like, you have this much experience. Yeah. Can you write a case? And people can't. They have not written a case before. Their job is different. Or again, unless you go to INTEA breakfast, you might not be able to tell whether you're moving in the right direction with your interaction design. So it's something that you can actually teach yourself, right? And we can work with you on that as well. But that's a very popular issue where you talk to a client and they know how to do quizzes, but they don't know much beyond that. Another thing that I identify is that our formal education, what we see in high school and in universities, and I know it's changing in schools currently, so maybe it will be different for our kids, but for us, the idea that there is
theory and then there is a test,
a test or a task where you have to apply a specific part of that theory, like a specific formula to solve a specific problem, right, is something that we're used to. We think that this is how education works, and this is the model that automatically gets engaged when we have to create something educational. So kind of moving away from that mentality is important, but also very difficult, especially for people who tend to be more in this kind of a little bit of a scientific field, right? So if you graduated some math, for formal education, math and physics, and then you became let's say a security expert through IT and so on, then you might be very, very formal about things, rather than hey, the real life does not work like that, or does not work according to rules, and then there's cases, let's simulate and so on. It's very difficult for people to move away from that. And finally, even if you build something great, then it's not always shared, not always seen to everybody. So it's very difficult to come to one expert and say, hey, we build this with the other expert, look at that, and so on. That does not accumulate within an organization. We try to accumulate this best practice inside and share, but like today, but inside an organization, typically the good examples just, they improve some area, but they don't get shared too much. And therefore, when people approach working on a new training, they do not have this benchmark of where we should aim, what can we do. They just go by whatever their idea of training is.
Yeah, and very often a very typical thing I see sometimes is that learning and development person meets with an expert and asks the expert, do we need a knowledge check? What kind of knowledge check? This is not the decision that has to be made by the experts, or at least not by experts only, because they are not learning experts. So they will use their previous experience, the experience from university, some habits that, we always have a test, let's have a test. And then the learning and development person has to say, look, in this particular case, you want people to change behavior, you want people to have the skills, but the quiz will not solve it. So, be a consultant to that.
Yeah. So these things are intertwined, of course, but we see as areas for improvement. Now, each of us wanted to share something at the end, just to wrap it up. And my example is this, which scared me to death. So this is a company that offers a learning management system, a course authoring system built into that, and so on. I have not tried this personally, but it looks great on screenshots. probably great guys, but something that when I was reading their feature list, I found this, right? It tells you that it will auto-generate questions. So essentially you feed it text and it scans it, creates quiz questions. And that is such a terrible way of creating learning, right? Asking about facts that are already written somewhere in the text is the absolutely lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy. It does not pass any criteria for threes, and it's just a lazy way of doing terrible learning. Now automated, so we can do more of that, and that is unfortunately a reality that's onsetting onto us with really computers and AI.
Yeah,
it's do that at scale.
Yeah, it's a misuse of technology. I mean, AI should not be applied to create meaningless interactions, right? And yeah, creating a quiz out of a sentence is quite meaningless, right? Because as you said, this is not even a knowledge, it's a knowledge level. Yeah, and Bloom's taxonomy is just a knowledge level, but with the onset of technology, knowledge, we do not have to carry a Wikipedia with us in our heads anymore. And we have to progress.
And also, frankly, I've seen people, and I've used this example where people know that they will be tested on content. They just take screenshots of whatever test there is, take pictures with their phones, they take pictures of slides. Then when the quizzes come along, they just look, okay, this quiz was generated out of this paragraph. It asks me something, and this is the answer. And that actually connects to your example. So do you want to take this?
Yeah, we were when we started to prepare for this breakfast, then I shared my experience with Sergey. I was a couple of weeks ago, I was trying to pass, I don't know the result yet, my S03E02 in wines, which is my hobby. And we were discussing, and of course, I'm very rarely in a position of a formal learner, right? And so basically, again, you can do that in a way that you have hundreds and hundreds of quiz questions, right? And you can have very stupid questions like how many major wine growing regions are there in France? 7, 8, 9, or 10. Absolutely meaningless interaction. Whereas in the final exam, that is very, very hard. The idea was that they give you a label of a wine, and you have to be able to tell so many things about that wine just by looking on the label. And it's not only the factual information you can read there. It's a brilliant Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley, but you have to be able to explain things like what would be the taste profile, how will you present it to the customer. I mean, there's even a question of how you should open a bottle of champagne when they give you a label of champagne, and it's a question like that, which is much more meaningful, because whether you're a sommelier, you are trading wine, you love wine, you will know a lot of facts about it, but being able to apply that, and there we are on the level 4, I think, right, of Bloom's taxonomy, or when they give you 2 labels and they tell you compare, so it's already analysis, right? And you will not be able to do that without all those facts, right? Sometimes
you'll need those facts anyhow,
but the interaction is much closer to what you're going to experience in your real life.
And again, speaking of experience and simulating real life, if you're a sommelier or a wine trader or a wine lover, you, like amateur alcoholic,
also called as Frankaholics, right?
Frankaholics. So in any case, you will never ever be asked to remember how many major winemaking regions are there in France. It never is part of your job to give out that number, but your job is a host of other things that you actually have to test for. And I think with that segue into the rest of your Friday,
exactly,
despite the fact that we have to work on Saturday, I think, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining. type a plus or write a comment in chat whether this was useful and meaningful.
Yeah, please let us know on a scale from awesome to amazing how you feel about this breakfast. Follow us on your favorite social network. We are on Facebook, on Instagram. We post pretty pictures and useful advice. We are on LinkedIn, where we post longer blogs. And of course, there's YouTube, which needs to be added at some point to this slide. You can Google for INTEA Learning on YouTube.
And see the previous breakfast.
Yeah, see the previous breakfast. You'll see this one in a couple of days as well.
And we meet again on November 26th, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So with the next breakfast, we'll announce that beginning of the next week, I think. Yeah. So, but you can already mark it in your calendars, same time, same place, so to say.
Yeah.
Thanks again. Thanks for your positive comments. And if there are any other topics you'd like us to cover, then get in touch with us and we'll definitely try to do that.
Right.
Thank you so much. Have a nice Friday.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.